You made history, becoming the first Afro-Latina woman to host on the NFL.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's so major, girl. What's up, you guys? I'm Ashley Everett, your host of Between Us Curls. Today we have TV personality MJ Acosta-Ruiz. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is amazing.
Yeah, I know, and we're twinning, girl.
Okay, we didn't
Look
even
at
plan
us.
this, but here we are. I love it for us.
But
yes.
we literally look so cute. Can you just walk us through your upbringing?
Yeah.
Where are you from? What's your
Sort of
childhood
from
like?
a few different places, right? So I was born in Miami, immediately went to the Dominican Republic, which is where my parents are from, quite literally immediately, like 3 weeks after I was born.
Okay.
Spent the first few years of my life there. Then we moved to New York, to Washington Heights, which is, if you ask any Dominican, it's sort of like the natural migration if they're leaving the island, is to go to Washington
there.
Heights. Yeah, you go to Washington Heights.
elsewhere.
And I grew up in Washington Heights for my entire childhood until I started high school. We went back to Miami. It's definitely home now. My parents are still there. Most of my family is still there. I went to college there, started my career there. I was very lucky to be able to do so. So an East Coast Caribbean type of girl.
Yeah. And what about your relationship with your hair
Yeah.
as a little girl and as a teenager? What is that like?
Yeah, I mean, that all tethers back to my childhood and to my Dominican upbringing. It's kind of wild because while culturally, the things that they teach us and that they ingrain in us about beauty standards and how you should look, they don't come from a place of malice. Although if you want to go back to generational trauma, that's a whole other podcast, right? That's a whole other show. But they they taught us rather, that in order to be more accepted, to be more successful, to be more palatable, we had to be as Eurocentric as possible. And so I got my first hair relaxer before I even hit puberty, right?
Wow.
Like, it's almost a rite of passage in the Dominican culture to be, all right,
So
we got to,
beautiful.
thank you. But I spent 3 decades straightening it, chemically straightening it, trying to get it as straight as possible. Like, that's gonna hide my blackness and my culture and my Latinidad. It won't. But that's what we were conditioned to believe, that if we fit into this box that the mainstream says it's acceptable, then we'll be better off for it. And it took me a really long time, especially working in news, working in sports, just working on television. There were rules of what you needed to look like. So the relationship with my hair and just with my own self-worth and self-love, to this day is still an ongoing journey, but it did start with once I embraced my natural hair.
Yeah, I can definitely relate, you know, all of the fitting you in a box and making you look like something else.
Exactly.
That is far from what we naturally look like, but here we are. Okay, so what moment did you realize that sports journalism and hosting and just all things entertainment was your calling?
So it actually, my first passion led me to this passion as well. So I was a dancer my whole life, which I know that you can relate to. Started dancing when I was a little girl in ballet and jazz, hip hop, danced collegiately, and then cheered professionally in the NFL. Before that happened, I was touring. So similar to your dance career, mostly Latin music artists. So we were all over like South America, the Caribbean, and in the States. And that eventually led me to a TV show, which was on a sister network to Telemundo. It was called Mundos. And it was a music show.
Okay.
So I was a dancer on this music show. Think like J-Lo, Fly Girl. At this point, I had dropped out of college, realistically, let's call it what it was, because the only thing I knew I wanted to do was dance.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm gonna stop acquiring these student loans and figure out what I wanna do through what I know I want to do right now.
Yeah.
But eventually that led me to be cast on this television show, and I just fell in love with the production aspect of it. I was like, this is crazy. This is how the sausage is made. Like, so I would show up early. I would talk to the producers. I would sit with the hosts. I would go into master control and figure out what was going on there. And I said, I love everything about this. My creative juice is flowing. And then I would talk to the host, and I was like, well, I've always been a good like public speaker, just very extroverted. I feel like I can do this. So, and just speaking with people and being immersed in that environment, I said, all right, This is it. Went back to school. 100%.
Yeah.
Went back to school the next semester, and the rest, as they say, is history.
That's beautiful. Yeah. You know, closed mouths don't get fed.
Period. You gotta
ask for what you want. You gotta
and be inquisitive, right? Like if you don't ask, you'll never find out. Like that's the whole point. Which is why I knew like journalism would be great because I was never shy about asking questions.
Yeah. So. You cheered for the Miami Dolphins. How did you hear about that audition?
So
and how did it go?
It's such a long road to my journey as a Miami Dolphins cheerleader. So I cheered collegiately, and that was the first time for the University of Miami. I was a Hurricanette. The U. I auditioned 5 times before I made the team.
Wow.
So 4 years in a row would make it all the way to finals, as you know now. 3 weeks in, you feel like you're part of the team. You've made friends, like this whole nine. 4 years in a row of going all the way to finals, and eventually I was like, all right, child, let me stop with the heartbreak. Like, let me focus on my own thing. I went on tour, I did all this other stuff. I went back to college, started my career, and I just remember laying in bed, the auditions were coming up, and I told myself, if I don't do this now and just see what happens, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And sure enough, that was the year that I made it. And
Amazing.
It was incredible.
And probably because you were like, I have nothing else to lose, so I'm
what
just
is there to
giving
lose?
It all,
right.
You know.
And at that point, because I was already a sports reporter, the only caveat was that I, of course, could not report on the Dolphins since I was working for the franchise at that point. But
but you were able to do both.
I was able to do both.
Besides that,
yes, 100%, 100%. And it gave me such an advantage because very few people actually get to be on the sidelines for the entire game. So I was very well immersed in the game and understanding the play calling even better than I already did and seeing the way that the game evolves at a first-hand basis. I remember one of my first games as a rookie, I could not take my reporter hat off to the point where my captain is like, girl, you gotta pay attention to the dances because I'm like, really, ref? You're not gonna call that?
Yeah.
That was clearly, so yeah, I'm like, that was pass interference. What are we talking about? So I had to like switch the hat there, but it's like a funny moment. They sort of chuckled about it, but they're like, but please pay attention to the job you're doing here.
We have to get these steps too.
But invaluable experience to be there and to understand how a franchise works from the inside as well. I think it's only helped me throughout my career.
100%. So, how did you get to San Diego?
That was a long journey as well. So Miami is a huge sports market, and I was very, very lucky to start my career there. Usually, when you start out in local news or local sports, you got to go to like, I don't know, podunk wherever and get your feet wet. Because I'm fully bilingual, I was able to do sports in English and in Spanish, which was huge in the South Florida market. However, nobody's leaving Miami, which meant my margin for growth was very, very
limited.
Short. Yeah, very limited there. So if I wanted to be a lead sports anchor or I wanted to get more reps, I was sort of at the mercy of whatever was left over for me. I had great mentors there who really, really supported me, but they said the same thing. They're like, you're gonna have to leave to really get the reps to build the credibility and the experience that you wanted. So I interviewed at a ton of places. I was very convinced I was going to Chicago. And San Diego ended up being the landing spot. So it started off as the lead sports anchor for the NBC station there. They sort of saw me and said, the job is yours if you want it. Their sports director was a former player and he was retiring, and that's sort of how it works. Like you don't get that position unless somebody retires or whatever. And then about a year into it, the station became a duopoly. So we had both NBC and Telemundos. So I was doing sports every night for both. 2 different control rooms. So I would literally have 2 different sets of mics on, and I'd have about 60 to 90 seconds to run from one side of the studio to the other side of the studio to go and do that. So even in the middle of the trials that I went through there were also so many beautiful opportunities to really not only flex my muscles, but also to reach an audience that I wouldn't have reached otherwise.
Totally.
So it was great. I thought it was the perfect landing spot, and it was, but it was also a really tough transition for me, for sure. I got very lucky to be around my friends and family, my support system throughout the early years of my career. And this was the first time that I really had to just stand on my own, not knowing anyone, in a place that wasn't really super welcoming to a Black woman who was sort of young and sort of young in her career, right? Everyone else was sort of seeing it. And it's not about being tough on you, because you know, if you're coming from a performance background, you can take the tough love.
Totally.
You can take the criticism. It was the condescension, it was the belittling, it was the disrespect to be there as a woman, to be there as a woman of color. it was really tough. It was probably one of the darkest times in my life, certainly in my career. And I made a lot of mistakes, and I owned those mistakes. I took a lot of L's. I let my pride get the best of me.
Yeah.
But it was one of the biggest growing moments for me in my life, for sure.
Yeah, those tough times. If you get through them, they turn you into the strongest, person that you're supposed to be. But they're trying.
Yeah, adversity builds character for sure. And I feel like I got character in spades at this point.
Okay. So being the lead sports anchor is a very big deal. What'd you learn? And also, what is your most memorable moment while covering the Chargers?
Okay, so let's start with what I learned. I think what I learned was that you have to lead by example, even when it doesn't work. So, treat others how you want to be treated, all of that stuff. Even when people don't follow that, and even when people are resistant to that, you still have to lead that way, despite what the reaction is, because not everybody's going to respond the way you want. But as long as you stay true to yourself, and I think for me,
stay true to yourself, not sell your soul.
100%. And that was the biggest lesson for me. Like, I am not going to succumb to what other people are doing because it doesn't align with the vision I thought of how this was going to turn out, right?
Yeah.
Like, I still forged the path that I really wanted to follow there. So that was huge. One of the most memorable moments, and memorable doesn't always mean positive.
Yeah.
So I was in San Diego when the Chargers were still in San Diego, and I was in San Diego when the Chargers left San Diego to go to Los Angeles.
Wow.
And it was a very visceral reaction from the fans, and rightfully so. I think when you've cheered for a team, people really become tethered, and it becomes part of the fabric of the culture of their town, right?
Yeah.
And so it was really, really hard to see people really heartbroken over it. And I think some folks are like, oh, it's just sports, who cares? But for so many folks, going to a game on a Sunday is a release, is the only thing that they can think of. Some folks never get to go to an NFL game.
Yeah.
So I have an acute understanding of how important these franchises are to the cities that they're in. And so that is something that will really stick with me, just seeing the progression of how the fans reacted to that, for sure.
You also were on the NFL Network in the Bay Area.
Yes.
How did you land that job? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so true to what the plan was, right? And what the investment was in my time and in my energy for my career, going to San Diego really opened up the doors and allowed me to build the credibility to get noticed by a network, by a national network, which was NFL Network. And so after I spent 2.5 years doing bilingual sportscasting there was an opportunity to be the Bay Area based reporter for the NFL. And I jumped all over it.
Yeah.
Although my goal was to be in studio, which I eventually got, I knew that I could do the job, and that it would be fun to be a correspondent and to be there and to have all of these different experiences. And going to the Bay Area, knowing already how the fandom is over there and how serious those two teams' fan bases are, I knew that it was going to be a really good challenge, and it was. It was incredible. Both of the teams were super welcoming. They were excited. They didn't have somebody based there before from the NFL Network specifically. So it was cool to sort of be the first one to go there after many years of not having someone there. And it was one of the coolest experiences ever, for
How
sure.
many years were you there?
I was there for 2.5 years as well.
Amazing. Following the 49ers and the Raiders, you made history, becoming the first Afro-Latina woman to host on the NFL.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's so major, girl. How did you feel?
It was crazy because I'm actually the first woman of color to host a show
Wow.
on the network, which was huge.
Wow.
Which was huge. But the crazy thing about learning that was going to be my next step at the NFL Network was that this was in the middle of the pandemic. This was 2020. So I'm sitting in my apartment in the Bay Area, quarantine. Everybody's just isolated. We had no idea. I think the whole world had no idea what was coming. And certainly we didn't know, was there going to be an NFL season? Are we going to play?
Yeah.
How are we going to broadcast these things? I was just calling my bosses to say hey, I just bought every piece of equipment on Amazon and I have a home studio up. Let me know if you need me.
Yeah.
Hoping that I wouldn't get laid off because we didn't know what was going on.
Literally,
so when my boss called me, I was like, oh, child, here it comes. Okay, I have savings. I'm going to be okay. And it was the exact opposite. I remember sitting on my couch. We had sort of a little loft apartment. And the real estate space is not a lot in the Bay Area. So when I say my little apartment, I mean it.
And it's expensive too.
And I was just sitting there in the corner. My husband was working on something in another room. And I had no words. I was like, okay. And my boss was like, hello, did you hear what I just said? And I was like, no, I'm processing. And it was just nuts because I didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
I really didn't. It was just this incredible moment of, okay, how am I going to do this? Am I doing the show from here? Am I moving to LA? And yes to all of those things. Like we had a little bit of time doing it from home, and then we packed up all our stuff and moved to Los Angeles.
Wow.
And eloped in the middle of all of that as well.
Wow.
So it was
so much to celebrate.
Too much to celebrate all at once. But it was really exciting, and I'll be honest, a little scary. Because
a lot of pressure, right?
It is a lot of pressure. It is a lot of pressure because I knew that as a Black woman, as a Latina, the margin of error doesn't exist. So however I set the tone here sets the tone for every other Black and brown girl who comes in after me.
There is no failure. You're already doing it right.
Thank you.
You know, paving the way. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I commend you. The pressure and the responsibility, how did you deal with all of that?
I think it was hard at first because it's trying to balance the excitement for it, but also the fear of failure, the nerves. So I had to remind myself, not only have I earned this position and I've worked for it, but I'm prepared for it as well.
Yeah.
But
that's what alignment is preparation and
100%
and work and all of that being aligned.
But I also knew that the margin of error didn't exist for me. So whatever I set the tone to be was gonna be the standard for everybody else who came behind me.
100%.
And so I took that very seriously, for sure.
So on that note, what is next? What else do you have in store for us? Anything else you'd like to share?
I think one of the biggest transition points now that I've transitioned off of Total Access, and I'm diving deeper into the storytelling part of my career and like the bigger marquee moments of my career. I'm really trying to identify who I am outside of my job.
Yeah.
And I think that especially when you are in a forward-facing job, it's really hard to separate the two things. And I think to a certain point you can't, because it is what you have dedicated to, but it's reminding myself that there is more.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm MJ Acosta, the sports anchor, but I'm also, and not even just also, like this is what I do, but it's not who I am.
Yeah.
But
doesn't define me.
But the links to both are real. Are real, and I think it's comfortable to sort of lean into that because then you don't have to do the deep dive work of, as my therapist would say, reparenting stuff. So it's really diving deeper into like my own identity and showing that to the world and using that as a beacon for my storytelling outside of the world of sports as well. So that's like a little bit of a teaser of what's coming in 2020.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Same girl, I'm on that same journey.
Yeah, okay,
you know?
period.
So I love it. Thanks for the inspiration. And thank you for joining us today. I loved hearing more about your story and learning more about you.
I'm MJ Acosta-Ruiz.
I'm Ashley Everett.
And you got the scoop on Between Us Curls.
Make sure you subscribe to Curly Culture for more curly content.
Hey you guys, what's up? I'm Ava Pearl, founder of Curly Culture, a community for people with all types of curly hair, from a 2A to a 4C. Let us know what you guys want to see in the comments below, and we'll see you guys on our next episode. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.